Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and I am doing a series of videos to show some of my past projects and, if anything, to help show where I started with Blackwork Embroidery, where I graduated from there. And if you follow my channel at all, then you will know of some of my more recent projects to see what my embroidery looks like now compared to what it did when I first learned Blackwork Embroidery. I first learned how to do Blackwork Embroidery when I was 16 years old. And I had already known how to do cross stitch, and I took a class on Blackwork and found that how I would outline my cross stitch was actually Blackwork. There are two forms of Blackwork, and the type I focus on is the earlier form. The later form is a swirly floral where you more or less you do prick and pounce and then you trace with ink the pattern onto the fabric and then you embroider over it. And that particular form is found in the later half of the 16th century, specifically in England. The form that I like to do is also known as a double running stitch. It is also known as Holbein stitch, and it is known as Holbein stitch based on Hans Holbein the Younger, who was a court portrait artist in King Henry VIII's court. King Henry VIII was the famous English king with 6 wives. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. And this form of Blackwork actually has its roots. It looks like Mamluk embroidery, which is Egyptian embroidery, which came before the 16th century that I like to focus on. And for one of the projects I want to show you today is a shirt that I had made my husband a few years ago. And as you can see, I embroidered the collar here. It's just a very small collar, but I also embroidered the cuffs to the shirt. So if you notice, this linen is a bit heavier than some linen that I use for other projects, and that I did for a couple of reasons. One, my husband asked for a heavier linen, and two, I did it just because I know my husband. My husband, he is a blacksmith, but aside from being a blacksmith, he is also a fencer and an armored combat fighter. He is rough on his clothes, and I have shirts that are made out of light linen that he has worn, and I could not tell you how many times I've had to take patches, and because every time he wears them, he puts holes in his shirts. So especially with embroidery, this is a court only shirt. This is not for him to fight in, but he's still heavy on his or hard on his clothes, so I wanted a heavier fabric for him, which is also why when I did this, I actually lined the embroidery. And at this time, in this, at least based on portraits of Hans Holbein the Younger, you will find the embroidery is, a lot of times you'll see the embroidery on both the front and the back side. You'll see, like, for example, a cuff, and you'll be able to see inside, and it's the exact same pattern. It is reversible. It is the mirror image of itself. But because my husband is rough on things and I'm afraid he would snag something, pull it, do something to damage it, you don't want hours of embroidery just wasted because your husband did something. So I lined it. But this is the front, and this is a particular pattern that my husband picked out. One of the things that I find to be really neat about this particular pattern, it is part of a larger pattern, but one thing, I did every 5th hole, so that made this pattern very large. And if I did the whole pattern, I should have done every 3rd hole to make it smaller, and then the other part of the pattern is just this image reversed, and so it's the same thing on it's the mirror image of itself. But the thing that is interesting about this particular pattern is if you look at 16th century, specifically they're called model books, but if you look at these pattern books, you will find this pattern in more than one book. In fact, you will find a lot of patterns, more or less it looks like authors plagiarized off of each other. And what I mean by that is you will find, for example, in 1529, I believe his name is Nicholas Supino. He has a book, it's at the Met, and it has all of the pages, except if you look, you can see certain patterns that look very familiar if you've looked at any other 16th century embroidery pattern books. And that's because one author's page 18A might be another author's page 22B rotated, and then you look and it might be the exact same. What I mean by the exact same, not only does it look like someone copied off of someone else, but if you remember with the printing press, you have something and then the ink, and then, so you've got the tablet, the ink on it, and then you take the paper and you press it, and then you've got the pattern. But if you take that and then use that again and again and just rotate it, well, what if that particular frame has maybe an irregularity? Maybe there's a little nick in it, and then anyone else who uses it after you will also have that same irregularity in that print, and so you'll see the same nick. And that's where it, and also just certain patterns that are on the page, if they're in the exact same order in the exact same way, it just seems almost too good to be true that like you realize someone else used the same thing again and again. And so that's where, if you find an Italian did the pattern in 1529, you will find a German person had the exact same pattern in their model book in, say, 1545 or 1563. I actually, in my embroidery blog, I have a listing of different model books that I found so far. And some of them, it's, hey, I recognize that acorn pattern because that acorn pattern is the exact same one in Basset's book or Zappino's book. And you get what I'm saying. So that's where one could argue, is this pattern Italian or is it German or is it both? So just something that can be exciting. If you want to know more about model books, please follow the link below to my blog. So this is a different viewpoint of the collar, and this particular pattern is on the very edge of Jane Seymour's cuffs. Jane Seymour was the third wife of Henry VIII, and her pattern is much more elaborate, so this is just the very end of her pattern. If I were to redo this, as you can see, my embroidery stops here, but the tie starts here, so I would actually continue the embroidery just a little bit. But as you can see, I've rolled my seam here, so nothing is going to show, nothing's going to fray. I've rolled over all the seams on the inside, but I also lined this just because I love my husband, but I didn't want him to damage the embroidery. One thing I would also do differently is, if you look at portraits in the 16th century, you will find that they've got a black line edging the very top, and I have nothing here, so that is something that I would do just for decorative purposes, as well as being a little more historically accurate, is putting that black line in that. And then here is one of the cuffs, and as you can see, I counted every 5th hole. And what I was talking about, I did do here on the cuffs, I just did not do on the collar, and that is just taking black thread here right on the edge and outlining it. If anything, it just helps with kind of showing off the edge, but also I think it's nice just for aesthetic purposes. But this is one cuff, and this is the other cuff. Thank you for checking out my YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video and would like to watch more of my videos, please follow the links on the side of the page. Please select thumbs up that you like the video. It helps with the algorithm. If you have questions or comments, please post them below. And please click subscribe and ring the bell to be updated when new videos come out.